Hello, everybody. My name is Uday Turaga, and I'm with ADI Chemical Market Resources. Thank you for joining us for this Flexpo Plus digital conversation again. As you know, our goal was to have Flexpo Plus in a relaunched format. Our goal was to relaunch Flexpo Plus in a new format this year, but COVID has put paid to some of those plans, so we are instead having these digital conversations. I am particularly excited about the conversation today. I've been looking forward to this discussion here for a while. Bob Maughon, who's with SABIC, has joined us today. He had kindly agreed to deliver the keynote presentation at Flexpo Plus a few months back, and we are now doing this instead in this format. So without much ado, let me quickly introduce Bob. Bob wears multiple hats. He's an executive vice president at SABIC and is responsible for sustainability as well as innovation. He is also the chief technology and the chief scientific officer for SABIC. So with that, let me welcome Bob. Thank you for joining us. As I said, I've been looking forward to this conversation over the last few weeks. So with that, Bob, clearly we're going to talk a little bit about business, COVID, and technology innovation, but maybe if you can quickly introduce yourselves, especially from the point of view of how did you get your start in the industry. I know you went to Rice, so there's a strong connection. So maybe if you can quickly start with a little bit of personal background, that'd be great.
No, absolutely. And look, thank you for the opportunity. I really didn't think when we agreed months ago that we would be doing this virtually at this point in the year, but just happy to connect and use this mechanism to have a great dialogue. So as you mentioned, I'm Chief Technology Officer at SABIC. I'm also Sustainability Officer, and so wear multiple hats at SABIC. If you come into my background, as you mentioned, connection at Rice, where I got my undergraduate degree in chemistry. From a personal note, met my wife, and as many that know me personally know, she was my lab instructor. So violated some ethical rules, I think, at Rice during that period. Got my PhD at Caltech, working at catalysis with Nobel laureate Bob Grubbs there, and my wife and I took the jump. She was a chemist as well to take a job at Dow. This was now, I guess, about 23 years ago. We spent 19 years, or almost 20 years, in Michigan at the headquarters, with really a sure plan that we would relocate from Midland to other locations around the globe. But we spent 20 years there, and really entered the industry as a scientist, right? Looking at new discoveries, new innovation, and catalysis and materials and process technologies. A lot of them all touching sustainability in some way, though, whether it was process efficiency or bio-based feedstocks or alternate routes to chemicals. It's really something that throughout my career touched me, and I think at the end of the day, took me to where I am now. I grew in those roles at Dow into where I was an R&D vice president at the end of my career at Dow as the R&D vice president for the plastics division and hydrocarbons division at Dow. And then was given just an incredible opportunity. SABIC reached out and was looking to consolidate technology, also bring in sustainability, product stewardship, a number of other functions, and really bring a holistic organization focused on innovation and integrating sustainability as part of that mission. And that was, to me, an exciting opportunity. So I took that leap. I'm still based in Houston, so I was able to, with Dow, relocate to Houston, and a couple of years later, make that transition to SABIC and stay in the Houston area. I really loved coming back to my time here from Rice and enjoying the time. I was traveling a significant amount, as you can probably imagine, to Saudi and of course to our global operations. But this has been a unique year, I think, for all of us, and I'm now balancing overnight calls and staying connected globally to also staying connected to my team and the labs, around the world. So look forward to talking. I think there's a lot of great things around COVID, sustainability, innovation, the industry that we could talk about, because I think this year has been a truly unique year for the industry.
Thanks, Bob. That's helpful. So one thing that struck me is it's correct that I think sustainability has come into a lot of focus in the last couple of years. But if you look at the chemical industry and you look at the broader enterprise of chemical sciences, I'm a chemist by training, but for a very long period of time, right, the chemical industry has been trying to integrate the environment in its work, right? I mean, in the early years, it was green chemistry, and then it kind of evolved into, the pursuit for bio-based feedstocks. And then more broadly speaking, right, efficiency, energy efficiency, the efficiency of our reactions that we pursue, waste minimization, a lot of that has been very central to the pursuit of, to the pursuit of, I guess, chemistry more broadly, and in particular R&D organizations in large chemical companies. But still, there are not many companies where they have the same person wear the hat of Chief Sustainability Officer and Chief Technology Officer. So in that sense, probably SABIC's a little ahead of its times here.
Yeah, it was a very attractive opportunity for me for that reason. I think you're going to see more of that. I think if you know Alexa Dembeck at DuPont wears the similar hat, so I think that's a transition they've made as well. And I think it has a lot to do with what sustainability means today versus what it maybe meant 5 years ago, and then back to your point, what it meant 20 years ago. I think as you highlighted, 20 years ago when I joined the industry, sustainability was process efficiency, less waste, less water, less energy intensity. I mean, I think traditional footprint type focus, which in general was very aligned to economic drivers for the company, right? Anytime you can drive process efficiency and so forth, it makes sense. And so sustainability was maybe an objective, but not necessarily a function within the company. It was really, again, about reducing waste, managing your environmental risk, your engagement with your communities, and making sure that your processes were continually improving. Then I think we moved into a period where sustainability for a lot of companies really, as the issues began to crop up more, right? Issues like the plastic issue, issues around climate change and carbon, maybe even issues around chemicals of concern and risk areas there. In my view, it became much more about risk management and corporate communications and positioning and branding. It was, in a lot of organizations, sustainability was organized within corporate affairs or maybe within EHSS or, a risk side of the company. And I think that was a logical place for that. But at that, I think what's transitioned from there is it's now much more about what are companies doing to actually address those challenges. How are you going to address your carbon footprint? How are you going to address, end of use of plastics? How are you going to transition your portfolio to eliminate, materials of concern? And then when you get to that point, then I think you move into a position where it's less about the storytelling and the branding and the risk management to what are the actual actions you're going to take? What are the investments that you're going to take? And I think that's what consumers are expecting. I think that's what the value chain is expecting. And I think that's why you'll start to see, I think, more engagement of sustainability with the implementation or project-driven organizations, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in the business unit itself, which I think, makes a lot of sense, or whether it's in a technology organization, especially when significant technology hurdles limit the effective business case delivery for some of these sustainable investments. So I think it's a trend, again, I think it's referenced at DuPont. I think you see it. You'll see it, I think, more and more, at least a transition of it into different parts of organizations going forward. And I think a lot of examples where business ownership is taking a much bigger role, which I think is fantastic also.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. One lens that we have used to kind of understand this is, I think a lot of the low-hanging fruit around sustainability has been picked fairly effectively.
Yeah, that's the issue. Yeah.
And now you have to really rethink, how do you have to go further back into the value chains and say, how do we do things differently? Yeah. And I think that gets more and more intertwined with questions around R&D, feedstock choices, operational practices, things like that. So
yeah, that's the change. I think it's definitely what are the technology solutions to address your footprint issues? What are the new business models, the value chain engagement? What are the actual investment decisions you're going to make? And that's that puts it in a different spot. You can't really manage that as well, in my view, from a sort of an external positioning like corporate affairs or even from an EHSS perspective, where you're managing the risk around your current assets. Because when you start moving into having to make investments in new solutions, I think you start having to look at how do you engage a much more cross-functional group to address the challenges. And that's certainly what SABIC has done. It was exciting to me. I mean, I think especially around the plastic end of use and the carbon footprint issues, which I think are the two really the critical existential challenges for the industry. Those require a fundamental rethink of feedstock, process technology, products, the whole suite. So it's a significant change.
Sure. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about COVID, right? And I'd be very interested in talking about COVID and its impact at multiple levels, right? First is, I think, just at a high level, right? How does a large chemical enterprise with a lot of manufacturing assets around the world, a lot of labs where you have to do a bunch of experiments, I guess, how does a large chemical enterprise, how have you guys responded to COVID? What has COVID done from a business point of view? I think I'm interested in that. And then maybe also, right, I mean, how do you conduct the business of innovation and R&D in this situation, or in this era of social distancing and things like that? And then maybe we'll talk a little bit about sustainability.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's great. It's a great topic, and one that I can honestly tell you, coming into this year, I didn't think was going to be the focus for our organization. I had been at SABIC, I think at that point for 9-10 months when we kind of crossed into 2020, and I was very excited about the transformation that I was driving in my organization. We had a whole set of actions we were going to drive on the portfolio and the communication and strategy and the way the teams were going to engage. And I was, obviously getting a lot of energy and visiting the sites and meeting the teams and learning the company. And obviously, come February, my year changed, right? I think like a lot of people. I think the industry has done an excellent job at managing this. I mean, I think to your point, how does a large chemical manufacturing organization handle it? I think whether you talk about BASF, Dow, SABIC, DuPont, others, I think, I'm sure they've all taken different approaches, but at the end of the day, it's, I think number one, it's ensuring the safety of your people first. And that's a complicated one because it doesn't mean send everybody home. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to serve your operations, but you've also got to make sure that you take the non-critical work that can be done or the work that can be done remotely, and you take advantage of reducing the concentration on site. And taking those people home, and that's why you take them home, and ensure that the people that are left on site then can work in a much more spatially separated way to protect them, right? And so that you protect workers at both sides of that equation. It meant that, obviously in manufacturing, that we had, critical operators that were really frontline workers that were there day in and day out, I think making, significant personal sacrifice to keep the business running and be productive. And at the same time, we had to make choices of what parts of those roles, could be moved out. So we've had tough choices, like a lot of companies. Do you run your pilot operations in R&D? How much of the lab footprint, do you need to run? How much, customer support do you try to manage, and how much is critical? So I think it's very much a regional and tactical sort of day-to-day, week-to-week decision. I mean, we moved into a mode of having a weekly call with all of my staff to just start making those decisions. Because region to region, it changed, and as it changed daily, it changed weekly. I think we focused on how do we make sure that we support our customers? How do we make sure that we support manufacturing to deliver product? And so, there were critical support roles that were on sites for those things. Innovation, projects that required, for example, long run times, stability, lifetime tests, et cetera, needed to be operated. And again, that critical support for customers and manufacturing needed to go on, but we could delay certain actions, especially at the worst point for each region. And we could leverage the broader global footprint to fill the gaps. And that's really what we did. So in some cases, we ramped up activities in certain regions that were in a different risk profile, while we decelerated in other regions to manage maybe the near-term challenge. And, it just required a lot of coordination. I think from the SABIC perspective, it was employees, customers, supply chain and meeting our, obligations, as the priority, and then everything else follows that. And I think what's been remarkable is the level with which we've learned how much you can do remotely, how effectively you can communicate. For me personally, I thought it was going to be a huge challenge for my new organization. My whole leadership team was really new. But in a way, because we were connecting more often through different tools, we actually, I think, built a much stronger rapport with each other, a much stronger relationship. And of course, crisis sometimes has a way to gel that. So I think we advanced our innovation portfolio, but we made some choices. I think we made some prioritization choices to make sure that we advanced what was critical. We ensured that we, especially key customer developments and products that were entering the market, we could get those positioned properly, that we could drive efficiency in manufacturing when the operations were clearly running. But that meant maybe some of the longer term programs had to be positioned or prioritized a bit, and we've been staging that back in through the year. So it's been a very complex puzzle, I guess is what I would say. But I think a fun one to try to keep our people productive, to try to get the most out of the work, but do it in a way that's obviously safe and puts our people first. And I mean, I think, I'm not sure with your company, but certainly, my team, right? They're all frustrated with being at home. I think there was an excitement in the first period of working from home, and I think at this point, people are missing being together. And we're obviously, each region's at a different place. A lot of our people are on sites, at high levels, whether that be in China or India, or Europe, or the US. But it's just one of those things we have to watch week to week and make sure that we're doing the right thing.
Right. So in some ways, the I guess multi-country footprint that SABIC has made it challenging, but it also provided you with, I guess, some options to kind of balance that challenge.
Yeah, I think it helps you. It helps you think about also going forward, like what's the right global footprint to have. You don't want to decentralize everything, but you don't want to centralize everything. I think, you have to think about what critical needs a region should have, and yet what support, if there's a challenge, you can bring from the other regions. So I think it's also helped us, because we're obviously looking at our global footprint as one of my priorities and trying to understand that. And I think this influences how we think about it for sure. And I would say the other benefit of global operations is you got to learn about how to manage COVID from the regions that were facing it first. I mean, I think, that was one of the best benefits of my team connecting on that daily or weekly basis, was just we were learning from the China team, and then we learned from the European team. And I think that helped us protect our people better.
Mm-hmm. So going from here, right, and thinking about the new normal, are there some practices that you see will continue?
Yeah, we just actually had our XCOM with our CEO, a full day call a couple of days ago on basically what are the learnings from COVID and how do we see it affecting our future? And this will be a dialogue that we'll have throughout the quarter. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I think you clearly see a few things. I think it's going to change the rate with which digitalization initiatives get pushed within companies, and the investment in IT, to not only allow remote work, but to allow external connection in a more effective way with customers, with our supply chain, managing our operations, using more predictive tools to help, address maintenance issues with less staff on site. I think there are a whole host of things that, from a digital perspective, that will happen. I think that it will change the way we work, right? I think that, like most companies, I think we all leverage the same consultants on facility management and then move to open floor plans and a lot of cubicles and office mixtures and so forth. And I think you're going to think about those footprints a little differently. I don't think that we're going to completely change, but I think you're going to think about the balance and spacing and what's needed on site versus what can be done remotely. Mm-hmm. That's a topic that we're definitely wrestling with right now, which is, our people in general want flexibility, but they want to work face to face. It's a balance, right? They want some flexibility to work from home, but yet they want to interact. And I think it's what is the right mechanism for bringing that balance, which, maybe, you allow more roles to work from home, but with a core amount of face time in the office or in the labs, and what roles are critical where they need to be on site, but are there ways to manage flexibility for those folks as well? So I think you're going to see more hybrid solutions. I don't think you're going to see a mass exodus where people work from home. Our industry needs people on the ground, in the labs, in the plants, in the supply chain, at the customer interface. But I do think you're going to see a better recognition of what's the most effective way to do those jobs. So you'll see a change there. And I think also how we connect with customers, how we engage externally is going to change. I think, one thing for sure that I think we've learned, that our customers have learned, is that we can actually very effectively support them remotely. And that, yes, you need FaceTime with customers for sure, but you can maybe even serve them better if you mix a more hybrid approach there as well. And so I think that's been, I think, another learning that isn't always the most effective to get somebody on a plane and fly them out to see somebody, when if you have better tools and better ways to communicate, you can do that remotely. So I think it changes a lot of things. It's also, from an industry perspective, it's elevated certain market segments and had an impact on where we should focus, right? I think, you probably are dealing with this as well, but, obviously the hygiene segment, personal care and hygiene, packaging and other areas where maybe there was some pressure over plastics in those segments. I think the value proposition of plastics has been reestablished a bit. I think doesn't mean that the end of life issue has gone away, but the value prop of what they were providing, I think, is more clear. I think my favorite example, which is less relevant to our products, but when you go to the grocery store, I remember going in April to the grocery store here in Houston, and the cleaning section was basically empty, as everyone knows, right? You couldn't find any products except the organic, non-chemically modified, cleaning products, which you could buy all of them that you wanted, right? I mean, so when it came to the decision of, do I want to protect myself and do I want to kill germs, they made a different choice than they had been making.
Right.
Same with packaged foods and so forth. And so I think it puts more pressure back to the sustainability topic on what we're going to do about the plastics end of use, but I think it reestablished the value proposition, reminded the consumer on the value proposition. So I think it has a big impact on where we're going to focus. I think the auto industry has been very disrupted by what's happening. Obviously, it had a near-term impact, but what you certainly see is acceleration in EV in the auto industry, because they're looking at efficiency and cost and positioning for the future. And for a lot of material companies, that will be a big point of focus. So I think, beyond the internal things, I think the market itself is changing, and we have to make sure that we provide the right solutions as we go forward for that.
Thanks, Bob. I want to talk quite extensively about sustainability, but we'll come back to that at the back end of our conversation. Sure. Maybe we'll switch gears a little bit to talk about technology, innovation, R&D. Clearly there are like big mega trends, right? There's the entire issue of climate change. There's this entire issue of mobility. There's digitalization, if you will. There's significant advances in telecom with the move towards 5G and things like that, right? And then if you take it a couple levels higher, right? Massive scale urbanization. Clearly, right, the chemical industry touches all of these segments, right? And in very deep, intimate ways. How do you guys, but even a large company is not going to be able to pursue opportunities that support or are driven by each of these megatrends. I guess, how does a large company think about prioritizing what these megatrends are and translating that into what their innovation or pipeline looks like?
Yeah, boy, if I had the perfect answer for you there. But I think the first thing you have to recognize, in my view anyway, is, if you're a chemical manufacturing based company, right, where you have large assets producing base, materials, whether that's polyolefins or engineering plastics or elastomers or what have you, I think the thing you have to recognize, you have an asset base that's you've got a return on. And so, to me, what's important is you think very carefully about what attributes your product portfolio has, what market opportunities are best served by that solution, what market opportunities, what market segments are growing and contracting, and you make logical decisions of how you best pair your portfolio with those emerging trends. Mm-hmm. And you can't tackle everything, and nor should you look to force your materials into the wrong segments for the wrong reasons, right? So I think you have to make choices, and you have to make decisions on R&D differently than we used to, right? I mean, I think the older model of material innovation was, develop a new process technology, a new catalyst, a new chemical reagent, a new building block, make a new material, engage application experts to figure out where you could use it, then go build support. That model doesn't work anymore, right? That's too inefficient. You waste too much time, too many resources on the wrong problems. I think it's very important that you're clear as a company on where your material portfolio can best serve the market, and where, again, as we touched on, those market opportunities, can allow you to capture differentiated value. And then you ensure your product portfolio, your R&D pipeline is aimed at delivering the differentiation needed for those segments. And so not the other way around. You can't just try to develop differentiated materials and assume you can place them. You've got to think about it in reverse. And look, I think that's a journey a lot of companies are going through. But as you look for a company like SABIC to grow globally, to go invest in in the U.S. and Asia, outside of the kingdom, but as well in the kingdom, that level of differentiation, of market understanding, of pairing your assets with the right market segments and the types of technologies becomes much more critical. Mm-hmm. But it also helps prioritize. Mm-hmm. It's not solely about volume growth, right? It's about ensuring if I'm going to put an asset in a region, that I've got the right suite of product portfolio to match with that asset that's going to deliver the right value. So that's what we use to prioritize. I mean, I think from a product perspective, but then at the same time, for my portfolio, beyond the application focus and differentiated products, it's clearly, ensuring that you're bringing low cost to serve process technologies that, allow reliable operations, low cost of conversion, high efficiency, high yield, and how you connect sustainability drivers to that process and product technology. Mm-hmm. As we make investments now, we don't have the choice to go back and redesign something that we're putting in the ground now to address a sustainability issue that we're going to face in 10 years or 5 or 15 years. We have to think about it now in an integrated way. And so very much sustainability drivers, especially things like the plastics issue or carbon, have to be designed into your process technologies. Mm-hmm. Now, because, as you make these capital investments for assets that will, last decades, you have to ensure that they're positioned to take advantage of innovation in that space, especially if you're going to drive towards a low carbon footprint in the future, that you're not investing in things that are going to make that a higher hurdle for you. Mm-hmm. So it becomes very much an integrated part of the portfolio today.
Mm-hmm. So, Bob, if you look at the history of the chemical industry, right, a lot of the blockbuster products that came out of the chemical industry were to a large extent driven by serendipitous innovation, right? Somebody tinkering with something in the lab, and then suddenly they find something. And then does this model that is more market-backed, more asset-driven, that is very rational, right, in its approach in terms of how you think about innovation, does that still leave room for serendipitous innovation, or does that happen elsewhere now?
I think it leaves room. Back to that point, I think you have to leave room for it, because I think, as you've seen, I'm sure, the industries that are heavy asset intensive, that are forced into this, optimization game of delivering those assets, are typically the industries that get disrupted the most by something they don't expect. I mean, the fact that you have the assets is both an advantage and a risk, because you become focused solely on how you bring value out of that footprint, and don't necessarily consider the fact that somebody else may not have that depreciated asset base, and they may have to invest in something different. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to leave space for it. But I do think, in an industry as mature as ours, I think you have to balance, how disruptive, what segments, why are you going there? I think building a business case in your head of, what are the areas where we want to disrupt? What are the markets that we want to serve, in a way that prioritizes that? I mean, it's, I think you've seen this transition in corporate technology organizations where, they become much more focused on, the business drivers and what are the breakthroughs that we want to focus on, but that are aligned to the company's strategy still, right? So I think you have to constrain that thinking a bit, but you must have some work in your portfolio that thinks about your footprint differently, because it is the biggest risk we have is that you become solely focused on optimizing value out of the current footprint that you don't recognize a threat that could really truly displace your cost position or your differentiation capability.
Mhm.
But it is the thing we struggle with the most. It's the thing we struggle with the
Yeah.
most is what's the right level of that, right? What's the right level? Where do I place the right bets? And you know, at the end of the day, I think the way real leaders like myself and other CTOs get measured is do we place the right ones?
Yeah.
I mean, I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we'll see.
No, fair enough, and that leads me to my next question, right? The whole traditional corporate R&D model, driven by a massive R&D campus, where a lot of that research gets done, has now evolved into something that's fairly similar to that model, but is now supplemented by a lot of other, I guess, innovation actors, right? There's startups, accelerators, there's relationship with labs and academia, you know, the traditional, what used to be called open innovation and all that. I guess where has the best thinking kind of landed in terms of what the innovation ecosystem needs to look like? Because I think maybe this is something that everybody struggles with, but it feels to me that the challenges over the next 20 years are a lot harder than the challenges we have faced in the past 20. Maybe every generation thinks that, but I wonder how you think of that question and what your innovation model needs to look like.
Yeah, I think this is the challenge. Goes back to your point on this. You know, how much space do you provide for that breakthrough innovation in the first place? Definitely, we view that you need a broader ecosystem to support, because I think that the risk you have is you're so internally focused on your current capabilities that you miss these massive disruptions. So definitely, I mean, in my role, right, I have a technology ventures organization that does VC investments and alternate value capture. We have a licensing organization that does both in and out licensing, so that we are, you know, and as well, we leverage the academic environment and institutes and technology developers outside. I think you need this broader ecosystem. But what I think you have to do in that broader ecosystem is be intentional about what you're trying to do. I don't think, none of us have the ability to have a venturing organization that's looking at all markets and all technologies and is sort of, you know, open innovation in its broadest sense. I think you need to be clear on what your company strategy is. Where are you trying to lead? What's necessary to do that? And then the areas where you then target these organizations towards enablers for those spaces. And so that's definitely what we're trying to do with our, you know, for example, our venturing and licensing activities. We definitely view those as critical to the technology and innovation ecosystem. But you need to arm those people with direction, right? The direction is, you know, we want to lead here. We want to be, you know, we want to be differentiated in these spaces, and then allow some space and some different models for funding that. It's the same with the academic environment. I mean, you know, you can't just go to a university, and you can, I guess, but you probably shouldn't go to a university and say, like, we want to go solve a holy grail. Here's a certain amount of money. Go work on those problems for us. I mean, you want to be engaged with those groups. You want to be intentional about the areas where you want to place the bets, because these are decade-long bets. If you're trying to go into spaces, and you can't simply start up lots of small projects. You need to make intentional decisions, and maybe you place a few of those bets to make sure you mitigate your risk, but it has to be connected to a company strategy. It has to be connected to a direction you want to lead. To your point, if you pick a few segments, whether you highlight the 5G or telecommunications segment, you highlight automotive or personal care, et cetera, I think you need to decide where those are, where you think the disruption is happening, and then commit. You have to commit to what do my current portfolio and assets fit with that, and what don't they fit, and how am I going to close the gap where I don't fit? And is it organically? Is it inorganically? And is it inorganically, you know, through maybe taking a bet with a VC or an academic lab to work on that new technology, or is it a more, you know, traditional path to closing your gaps, right, through M&A and other approaches? I think you have to look at it holistically, but it has to start with some intention about where you want to lead. I mean, that's in general, I think, where some of the corporate R&D organizations struggle or have struggled in the past is, you know, do you Do you have them aligned towards true breakthroughs of new businesses that are, not currently in the scope of the current company? Or do you align them to maybe be capabilities that are aimed for depth of expertise to support the existing businesses? I think both models have big failure modes, right? One incrementalizes those resources, and one potentially puts them in areas that long-term don't make business sense, right? And the answer, I'm sure, my view is the answer is in between. And the answer is when you take those disruptive steps, that you're at least building a business case for how the company will monetize in a new business segment, and challenging those assumptions along the way before you invest massive capital, right? And that's typically where the biggest hurdle for the company comes, is when is that point where you move from proof of concept and demonstration of something to having to invest large capital and taking that kind of financial risk. I think you're also going to see, I think in our industry, a lot more partnerships and collaborations, both within the industry and with new players, to mitigate some of that risk, for sure, especially in very disruptive areas.
That's helpful, Bob. Just so, just to kind of wrap up this discussion on technology innovation, are there technologies that you are excited about? And on the other side, I guess what frustrates you as a chief technology officer, as an innovator, as someone responsible for innovation in and around that space?
Yeah, look, I think there are some very exciting process technologies out there that are going to, I think, be very enabling as we look at our carbon footprint. I think that certainly the area of electrification and renewable energy into our assets is going to be a big push within the industry. I think you've probably heard a number of players talking in that space, which means not a product innovation, but more of a process integration of how you electrify what has been typically mechanically driven devices, units, furnaces, reformers, heat exchangers, etc. I think you're going to see changes in how our processes work. And I think there are really massive disruptions in market segments. And I think that's going to drive really new chemistry needs. I mean, if I look in the EV space, I mean, I think you're going to see with what's happening in the auto industry, where they're making choices between combustion engines and EV, you're going to see them making decisions transition faster than we would have thought 2 to 3 years ago. And the right material solutions to enable that transformation, I think, is a huge area of potential innovation. So I think there are a lot of exciting things out there for technology. I think chemistry is still a very exciting place to play. But it's always a question of, are you anticipating the right market dynamics or not to play? And certainly 5G is another great one, right? I think there's just tremendous material needs in this space.
Right. Excellent. So let's maybe transition into the last piece that I wanted to talk about, which is sustainability. When we spoke a few months back, there was a lot of discussion in the media, in our trade literature and all that, right, around how in many ways COVID was one of the best things to have happened to the chemical plastics polymer industry, right? But I think you articulated it very well, and I've since then stolen that line a couple of times in talking to our clients and some of our work. And you said that COVID has truly clarified the value proposition for plastics. And so I wonder, that was probably April or so. I wonder how you think of COVID now. Has that clarification intensified? I'm curious how you see that.
Yeah, I think the statement's still very valid. I think, and I use those words carefully, right? I think that it did two things, right? It positively reaffirmed the good that the materials provide in those segments, which in the early challenges with sustainability pressure, we were struggling to get that message across. I mean, at the end of the day, let's be frank about it. I mean, if we transition everything back to glass and metal and paper, we're not doing a service to the environmental footprint, right? I think that's, the reason that we went to these materials is that they're light, they're efficient, they have a lower footprint, they provide incredible advantages in terms of shipping costs and transportation fuel use and energy production during their production themselves. These are very efficient materials. So I think it reaffirmed the value they provide. Having said that, though, there's issues that we've talked about, whether it be carbon or let's call it the plastic waste for end of use issue. Those issues, if anything, have not been diminished by the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, I think that the pressure on dealing with them has intensified. I think it's intensified for a few reasons. I mean, one, COVID has, again, put the focus on our health and the environment and risks that those pose to us. And so I think that those issues are still very much in front and center to the population. But beyond that, governments are having to make investment through stimulus investments that will change the infrastructure. And when you're having to do that, it's actually where a disruption is happening, where you're going to see in certain regions significant renewable energy investment. You're going to see significant investment in the waste infrastructure, and many, many more examples like this. And so, if anything, it's also clarified the urgency with which we need to have solutions to meet those needs. Because if we don't bring the right solutions, these investments that are going to happen through stimulus investments are going to be invested somewhere, and they're going to either be aligned with where the industry needs to move to keep us sustainable and positioned for the future, or they cannot. So I think it's clarified it in both sides. It's put pressure on the value, the end of use value proposition or the environmental impact, but it's also reinforced the value that they bring. And I think that helps the dialogue. I think it makes it a much more constructive discussion. The answer isn't just ban these materials. It's, what is the right way to handle the materials? What are the right circular business models? What are the right process solutions that can enable a better end state while still preserving that we use the right materials, right, for their purpose? So I think that's, to me, there's been no diminishing of the pressure from these critical sustainability challenges, yet at the same time, increased engagement from consumers and the brands and the retailers on how do we solve it, right? So when you think about things that we've done as a company, we've announced a closed loop project where we're working directly with converters and retailers on closed loop solutions for moving the plastic back. We've obviously made announcements around our True Circle platform and work around bio-based feedstocks, our certified, bio-based materials, our certified circular polymers, which are based on chemical recycling, but as well as mechanical recycling, design for recycling. How do we ensure that we're working with the value chain to design products in a way that make them more suitable for recycling? So I think, you're seeing much more focus within the value chain on those challenges, because I think there's a view that we need to solve the problem, because these materials do serve a purpose. They serve a very significant value in the market, but therefore the pressure is on us to come up with solutions. And by us, I mean really the entire value chain, because I think you see phenomenal engagement from all parts of the value chain now. I think there's a clear recognition that we need to drive change here. And what used to be more challenging, bringing a retailer and a brand and a converter and a machine manufacturer and a material producer, I guess, together at the table to talk about innovation, I think that's much easier to do now. I also think that you see much more willingness of peer companies at the same part of the value chain to collaborate. And I think you see that through the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, where you have a lot of the whole value chain participating, but a lot of material producers working together. We're also engaged at the World Economic Forum and the Low Carbon Emitting Technologies platform with many of our peer group companies in the industry, working on solutions on carbon. So I think you're seeing, again, companies are still focused on intellectual property and positioning and differentiation, but I think there's a recognition that some of these issues need collaboration, especially when new value chain entrants like the waste infrastructure part of, and maybe the electricity providers, other industries now become part of your value chain and your approach. It requires probably more coordination in the industry to help manage, how we're going to approach that. So I think you're seeing a lot of changes and how those are addressed now.
So one of the challenges, right, we've spent a lot of time looking at this issue over the last few years, right, working for different clients, looking at different parts of the value chain and all that. And one of the big challenges was the consumer brands, to a large extent, drove a lot of the conversation in the initial years. But the willingness to pay for some of these changes was still very, very limited, right, if at all. So I wonder how all of that is impacting the efforts in this area?
Yeah, I think what you see clearly now is that they are willing to make investments to address the issue. I think that there's a clear view that we need to make these solutions competitive for the long term. But you are seeing, I think, a big change versus what you and I had dealt with in the past on their willingness to take financial risk, to test pilot concepts, to enter the market with new solutions, to evaluate the customer feedback, right? To engage at that level. And then, of course, yeah, push us to drive the efficiency of those solutions down, the cost down. I think that's the way the industry has worked in the past, and I think that's what you're seeing here. That's a big change from 5 years ago. It's no longer bringing a solution that's identical to what I have today, but has all of these benefits, that works in all my equipment the same way and doesn't cause me any complexity in product design. No, it's a clear recognition that we need to drive that change, but with an understanding that we need to do it in a way that we see a path towards competitiveness for the future, right? And I think that's a significant accelerator to this space.
So one of the weak points that we've seen consistently in projects that focus on plastic recycling, sustainability, and all that has been, the last segment, right? The waste gathering, recycling, infrastructure there continues to be challenged. The ability to kind of invest in some of that infrastructure is not very high, right? Because of cost reasons. Do you continue to see that as a challenge? Are there other parts of this broad sustainable, and here I'm asking you to probably take a slightly higher view as an industry leader rather than specifically focused from your company's point of view, but yeah, are there other parts of the value chain where you feel progress hasn't been faster?
Yeah, look, I think this is very where you see the progress, right? I think that the areas that have invested more significantly in waste infrastructure are seeing much more momentum in moving towards this new future. So take Europe as an example, right, where I think it has been incentivized from an infrastructure investment to make this more feasible. You obviously see differences in the U.S. where honestly landfill value for the waste companies doesn't incentivize the investment. I think in Asia, the challenge you have is the dispersity of the waste and the small scale collection and dispersity, decentralized waste challenge. But I definitely see in the areas where it's been incentivized, the infrastructure has been enabled by the government, that these issues are starting to go away. So I think this will be a journey. It's going to have to, at the end of the day, work through a process of defining the value of that end plastic and aligning on what that value is. And that value is going to come likely through understanding the risk and the cost of producing these materials. I think, and then some of that will be regulatory driven. And I think we're seeing, very, very clearly from the Green New Deal, that pressure, right? I think it's very clear that you'll start to see value more clearly understood, and that will then incentivize the investment, and you'll also incentivize offtake. And once we start incentivizing, we as an industry start committing on offtake based on the understanding of the value of the waste, I think the rest of the chain will be able to react to that. So I think this is the transition that's going on, right? And unfortunately, the regulatory environment will have an influence on how that value gets set. Right. And it's why we're so engaged with what we think the right solutions are for the long term, so that we can hopefully position the right things. I mean, at the end of the day, whether I'm right or wrong, I think that mechanical recycling is by far the lowest footprint, most efficient model, especially in large geographies where you have a large collection. You can, you have higher volumes of clean feeds essentially in that stream. And you're going to see, I think, advancement of more use of mechanical into new application areas through new technologies, and integration of chemical recycling as a way to upgrade the value with a lower value stream in the waste that's not advantaged by mechanical recycling. And I think that those kind of integrated projects that are going to build over time is going to be a big part of really defining the best way to monetize that waste stream. And that's really, at the end of the day, what's going to drive this, is that there's a better value pool for the waste infrastructure. So I see progress there. I think the Alliance is doing a good job of driving pilot projects that are testing what are the right geographies, what are the right models, when is mechanical versus chemical recycling or advanced recycling fit. What are the incentives you need to drive locally to engage consumers in the process? I mean, I think that's what, to me, the critical role that the Alliance plays right now is seeding these types of real projects with defined test cases. So it's not worked out for sure, and it's going to take time for it to work itself out, especially in geographies that have more, say, inherent hurdles. But I'm seeing the right progress at this stage.
Excellent. Bob, that's all that I had at my end. This has been a fascinating conversation. I much appreciate you making time for us here, and hopefully we'll see you in person next year.
Absolutely. Hopefully we'll do this next time face to face, but enjoy the time, and thanks for the opportunity to talk through some of these issues.
Likewise, Bob. Thank you very much.